Greetings, friends. It's Denise again with Denise's Dancing Paintbrush and another watercolor. Last week I posted how I made this photo reference of this dove and blueberries for a botanical. And so this week I'm showing you how I painted it. I first started with my line drawing in pencil, but went over all of the lines with a very, very light coat of watercolor, purple for the bird and blue for the berries. And then I erased the pencil lines, because you see, you can't erase them once you start putting, you can't erase them once you put more paint on the paper. It sort of locks the pencil lines in, and if you don't mind that, that's great and wonderful, but I didn't want those pencil lines to be so pronounced, and so I erased them right away. So now they're very, very faint, the outline that I did in watercolor, but I can still see it. Some of the berries were not quite ripe, and so they were rather pink. So this first layer, I'm putting in just a pale, pale foundation. If anything had a white highlight, I left it white right up front. Like the speck, the little white highlight in the bird's eye, I left that white. And the upper part of the beak, I'll be leaving white as well. But most of the berries didn't have a really bright highlight, so I'll just use the palest ultramarine blue for my highlights. And then I have a very pale green foundation for the leaves, of course. Just a few leaves here and there. But I also put a little bit of green in the little white flowers. Later I'm going to put a little blue with it, and the flowers looked like they had a tiny bit of gray, but you don't want to use gray. It's a flat, lifeless color. You want to use colors layered on top of each other to give you that grayish look. And now I'm going to use Purple Lake on the feet and on the stem that the bird is standing on. And that's my first layer. Notice that I'm using a piece of tracing paper to lean my hand on. It's because your hands have a certain amount of oils, and watercolor paper is very absorbent. If you lay your hand directly onto the paper, the oils from your hand will start to seep into the paper, and being that oil and water don't mix, it will keep the watercolor from sticking to those places very well, and you don't want that. So I'm using Purple Lake on top of the yellow ochre foundation on the bird. Mourning doves look slightly brownish gray, but you don't want to use gray. Again, it's very lifeless. So I'm using Purple Lake on top of yellow ochre. And I'll even use a little bit of orange later as well to give it a glow, a very warm glow. But those two together will make a slightly gray cast. And I may even use a little bit of brown, but not very much. I find that brown, much like the black that comes in the watercolor tubes, is very lifeless, and so I want to use it very sparingly. So this is my second layer. I'm adding more blue to the blueberries, but also a little more blue on the pink berries. This is where you start adding more definition. And I'm not painting the entire berry. You notice I'm just painting where the shadows are. I'm leaving that first layer of ultramarine blue to be my highlights. To make it blend, I go back and I just add a little bit of water to blend it in, the darker into the lighter, so it looks round. And you can see I used a little blue in the stem that she is standing on. And a little blue in the flowers. And with a smaller brush, I can add a tiny bit of black to her eye and a bit of a shadow on her beak. Some shadows on her feet. And that's it for my second layer. The third layer on top of all the others, remember watercolor is very translucent. You can see the light through all the layers. And you see I'm putting a little orange on the chest. It almost looks brown on top of that purple lake and yellow ochre. But it adds also a bit of warmth. I have to keep in mind where my highlights are. And add more to the shadows. A little orange on the feet. And now I'm using a different blue. This is intense blue. It's very bright, but on top of all the other colors, it looks almost purple. This is intensifying the shadows in between the berries. So it seems a little time consuming and, counterproductive to go back and add layer after layer on top of each other. However, you never want to paint watercolor directly out of the tube. It looks dull and lifeless. It tends to crack and chip. And doing it this way adds a bit of a luminosity that you don't get otherwise. This is how the masters work, adding layer after layer on top of each other and waiting for it to dry each time. This layer is just a little purple. It gives us some good deep shadows. It's actually diazonine violet that I toned down with a little bit of blue. So the last thing is to cut your paper away from the watercolor pad. And it's not as easy as it looks. There's only one spot where the paper is not glued, and it's right at the rim. And you have to put in something that's not that sharp, like a letter opener. And very gently go all the way around. That's the only way to do it without tearing the paper. And there it is. Last thing to do is to grab a pencil and sign it. All done. What do you think? Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. I certainly appreciate all my subscribers. Do give me a thumbs up if you liked this one, or if you'd like to see more content, just leave me a message. Bye everyone. I'll see you next time.